All right, Steve, my next question is from Peggy, and she wants to know, in Luke 1:15, was John the Baptist filled with the Holy Spirit like we are today?
When you're talking about the filling with the Holy Spirit, Luke 1:15, it says this, "For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. He will also be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb." And that's what the passage is speaking about. When you talk about the filling of the Holy Spirit, that is a technical term for the empowering of a believer by God. And so there are two works of the Holy Spirit in the New Testament. There's one work of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, the Bible would talk about the Holy Spirit would come upon a prophet, or they would be filled with the Holy Spirit. Like, for example, with John the Baptist in this passage. And you can see it later on in his ministry. They would be filled with the Holy Spirit. And it's the idea of the Holy Spirit coming along and empowering them to do the things that they're called to do. So Samson's a great example. He would be filled with the Holy Spirit, and he'd rip gates off of walls. And so it's things that he obviously couldn't do without the power of the Holy Spirit. And the same thing with the prophets, whether you're talking about Samuel or Isaiah or Ezekiel. It talks about them being filled with the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit coming upon them. And so that's the empowering portion of the work of the Holy Spirit. The thing, and that's something that's common in the Old Testament, but only to certain individuals. And John the Baptist was one of those guys. It wasn't everybody. There's a promise in the Old Testament in Joel 2:28 that talks about in the future that God's going to pour out his Spirit upon all flesh. So it wasn't something that was common to everyone. It was prophets and kings and priests who were filled with the Holy Spirit, and John the Baptist being a prophet. But there was a promise that in the future it would be the Holy Spirit would be poured out upon all flesh. And so you have that at the end of the Old Testament. So that's something you have in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, you have the same thing. You have the empowering by believers of the Holy Spirit. But you have another activity of the Holy Spirit where it's what's called the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, where the Holy Spirit comes to live inside of you. And that is the way that we're different from John the Baptist. Because not only can I have the power of God, but I become the temple of God. At the time of John the Baptist, the temple of God was in Jerusalem. And that was the place where the Shekinah dwelt. There's no record of it in the temple in Jerusalem, but when you're talking about the tabernacle and you're talking about Solomon's temple, the Shekinah, or the glory of God, or the presence of God, dwelt in the temple. And what the New Testament teaches is that we become the temple of God. And so there is a difference between us and John the Baptist. John the Baptist was empowered to be a prophet, but he didn't have God living inside of him. Two distinct things. And that's the thing that we have. Let me give you this is Jesus speaking about the ministry of John the Baptist. He says, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see?" This is in Matthew 11, verse 7. "A reed shaken by the wind," somebody who blows with the wind. And then he says, "What did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it's written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist." But then Jesus says this, "But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." And the reason he's saying that is because John the Baptist was deficient in an area that we're not deficient in, and that's the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, the fact that God lives inside of us, and we now become the temple of God. So that's the answer to, not in a nutshell, but yeah.
Yeah, but just stop and think about that. That's like a crazy thing.
I know.
I mean, even Paul, I don't think they ever got over the fact that, because they grew up under the Old Testament, that the temple was their body, that God lived in them. It was like something that just awed them.
Yeah.
Cool stuff.
Yep. Something brand new to the New Testament.